Olivia parked her car in front of the chalet, letting out a relieved sigh. Snow blanketed everything around like a soft, silent cover, turning the landscape into a Christmas postcard. The wooden chalet, with simple wreaths hanging on the windows, looked like the perfect retreat. For Olivia, this place represented more than just a break from life's chaos. It was a chance to reconnect with herself. She had been feeling the weight of her mother's constant questions about why she was still single and her brother's insistence that her career needed more ambition. All Olivia wanted was a moment of peace, away from all the judgment. She had always loved Christmas, but in recent years, the season had lost some of its magic due to family pressures. Now she was determined to create a different kind of Christmas, one that was hers alone, filled with the quiet of the mountains and the warmth of a crackling fireplace. She grabbed her bags, feeling the cold on her face and the fresh scent of the mountains. Each step in the snow seemed to take away a piece of her worries. When she stepped into the chalet, a smile crossed her face at the sight of the glowing fireplace and the scent of pine filling the room. It was a perfect scene, almost like a warm embrace. For the first time in a long while, Olivia felt at peace. It was just her, the silence, and the promise of tranquil days, or so she thought. As she unpacked her things and hummed a Christmas tune, Olivia tried to ignore the exhaustion she felt. This trip hadn't been meticulously planned. It was an impulsive decision after weeks of grueling work at her brother's company. She had heard about the chalet for years, a secluded space used for family retreats and rarely offered to others. When she learned it would be empty during the holidays, she asked for the key, desperate to escape the incessant demands of her life. That morning, driving up the snow-covered road, she felt a twinge of guilt for not mentioning her plans to stay there. She knew her brother might not approve, but she also knew she desperately needed this time alone. Between contracts, deadlines, and demanding bosses like Brandon Neal, she was at her breaking point. When she heard the sound of an engine outside, Olivia stopped humming. She frowned, assuming it might be a neighbor, but seconds later, she heard heavy footsteps on the porch. The door swung open, bringing in a blast of icy wind, and with it, Brandon Neal. He stood there, serious-faced, his black overcoat dusted with snow, and his cold eyes scanning the room. Olivia froze, stunned. She knew that look all too well. After all, Brandon wasn't just the CEO of the company she worked for, he was also the primary source of her sleepless nights and stressful weeks. And clearly, he was just as surprised as she was. The silence lingered until Brandon broke it with a question. "What are you doing here?" Olivia crossed her arms, irritated. "I should be asking you that. This chalet belongs to my family, and I asked to stay here." "Well, it seems your brother forgot to mention that he also offered it to me," Brandon replied, exasperated. He closed the door, shrugged off his coat, and shook his head as if the whole situation were a major inconvenience. Olivia felt her blood boil. Of course, he was here to ruin the one moment of peace she had planned. Brandon Neal was the coldest, most insufferable CEO she had ever met, famous for his rigid demeanor and endless demands. To make matters worse, the sound of the wind outside made it clear the snowstorm wasn't going to let up anytime soon. They were stuck together. The following days became a battle of egos. Olivia and Brandon could barely share the same space without bickering. From arguing over who got the better bedroom, a fight Olivia lost, though not without a subtle shove to provoke Brandon, to the thermostat settings. "It's too hot. This feels like a sauna," Olivia grumbled. "It's a winter chalet, Olivia. Not a beach house," Brandon retorted in that sarcastic tone that made her blood simmer. Meanwhile, the news outside was anything but promising. The storm showed no signs of letting up, with weather reports warning that conditions might remain impassable until Christmas or even longer. This only seemed to heighten the tension between them. Olivia's stress mounted by the day, while Brandon, in true form, seemed unfazed by their shared discomfort. But amid the constant clashes, unexpected moments began to surface. One day, as they argued about how to organize the limited space in the chalet, Olivia caught Brandon chuckling quietly at her failed attempt to sort the pantry. "Are you trying to organize that like a corporate filing system?" he teased, arms crossed. "At least I'm not leaving everything scattered like it's a campsite." Olivia shot back, but she noticed a faint smile on his face. It was the first time she had seen him like this, relaxed. The turning point came one night during a power outage. Sitting by the fireplace as the wind howled outside, the silence finally settled between them. Olivia, tired of the constant sparring, decided to open up. She shared how Christmas had always been a special time for her, a rare moment when her family came together, away from the fights and demands. "I guess Christmas gives me hope that things can be different," she said, almost as a confession. To her surprise, Brandon also revealed something personal. He admitted he hated Christmas because, as a child, it had been a season full of unmet expectations and broken promises. "I always hoped for something magical, but it never seemed to happen," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. In that moment, Olivia saw a vulnerability in Brandon she never imagined. He wasn't just the cold, calculated Sue she thought she knew. There were layers to him she was only beginning to uncover. And for the first time, the silence between them felt comforting, not awkward. Determined to lighten the mood, Olivia transformed the chalet. She brought decorations from her car, stringing up lights and adding bursts of color everywhere. When Brandon woke up to see the space completely changed, he stopped in the doorway, taking it all in before shaking his head in disbelief. "Is this for real?" he asked, arms crossed as he surveyed the twinkling lights and the tiny makeshift Christmas tree. "Completely serious," Olivia replied with a mischievous smile. "If we're stuck here, we might as well make it feel like a real Christmas." Brandon let out an exasperated sigh but couldn't resist her contagious enthusiasm for long. "All right, but don't blame me if this gets out of hand," he said with a playful look, grabbing a box of decorations to help. Olivia's festive spirit began to chip away at Brandon's barriers in ways she hadn't expected. He helped hang the ornaments with almost exaggerated precision, pointing out small details that could be improved. "Are you always this meticulous?" Olivia teased, raising an eyebrow. Only when the decorations threatened the harmony, he replied with a wry smile, his voice lighter, almost playful. Later, Olivia insisted they bake cookies together. Brandon, initially reluctant, eventually joined in. "Do you really think I can decorate these without making it look like a tornado hit?" he asked, holding a piping bag with a comically desperate expression. "Trust me, you'll do fine," she said, guiding his hands and laughing at his clumsy attempts. When one cookie ended up with a crooked, exaggerated smile, they couldn't stop laughing. The real turning point came during a snowball fight. Olivia challenged him, and Brandon initially refused, calling it childish. But one snowball hitting his shoulder was all it took for him to join in. What started as a battle turned into endless laughter, with both of them rolling in the snow like kids. For the first time, Olivia saw Brandon completely let loose, and the genuine smile on his face was something she wouldn't forget anytime soon. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Olivia glanced at him and realized something was shifting. "You know," she said softly, "I didn't expect you to be so good at having fun." Brandon looked up at her, a spark of vulnerability in his eyes. "I guess you're teaching me how to do that again." By Christmas Eve, something had undeniably changed between Olivia and Brandon. The playful banter and shared moments of the past days had broken down the walls between them, and Olivia began to see Brandon in a new light. The cold, calculated man she thought she knew now seemed more human, more approachable. Brandon, on the other hand, found himself feeling something different for Olivia but was still battling his internal resistance to let it go further. As they added the finishing touches to the Christmas decorations, they shared stories about family traditions. Olivia mentioned how, as a child, she loved baking cookies with her mom, a simple act that always made her feel part of something special. Brandon hesitated but eventually admitted he had no fond Christmas memories. "It was always a holiday full of expectations that never came true," he said, trying to mask the vulnerability in his voice. The conversation grew more intimate as it progressed. The warmth of the fire and the scent of pine in the air seemed to create an invisible bond between them. In a quiet moment, Olivia looked at Brandon and realized how close they were. Unexpectedly, as they talked about finding meaning in small things, Brandon leaned in slightly, and Olivia didn't pull back. In the heat of the moment, their lips met in an intense kiss. They pulled away quickly, breathing heavily as they tried to process what had just happened. Brandon, visibly conflicted, apologized. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, taking a step back. Olivia tried to hide the disappointment in her eyes, but the silence that followed was charged with a tension neither of them could ignore. Though they tried to act as if nothing had happened, something within them had undeniably shifted. The kiss had awakened a powerful passion they both struggled to suppress, afraid of crossing a line that could change everything. Still, they continued preparing for Christmas Eve, with Brandon helping Olivia set up a beautifully decorated and cozy table. He brought in firewood and even adjusted the lights for better harmony, while Olivia focused on the finishing touches for the dishes she was preparing. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken emotions, but both knew that Christmas Eve would be something special. Between stolen glances and careful disguises, there was a quiet anticipation that this moment together would change their lives forever. The long-awaited Christmas Eve finally arrived, and as Olivia looked around the chalet, decorated with simplicity and care, a wave of emotions swept over her. When she planned this Christmas, her intention was to make it as different as possible from the lonely and demanding holidays of past years. But now, instead of being alone, there was someone there with her, someone who, surprisingly, made everything feel more special. Olivia couldn't help but think how grateful she was that Brandon was there. For Brandon, this was already the most unexpected Christmas he had ever experienced. He never imagined spending the holiday snowed in at a chalet with someone he once saw only as a co-worker. Yet, after the past few days, he realized how Olivia had awakened something within him that had long been dormant. This Christmas was full of meaning and new emotions, even if he was still grappling with how to fully embrace what he felt. As the table was set and the fire crackled in the background, both felt the magic of the evening settling in. Sitting down to share their improvised Christmas dinner, Olivia suggested they each share what they hoped for this Christmas. Brandon spoke first, his voice carrying the caution that always seemed to accompany him. "I've never been good at celebrating Christmas. I always thought it was a holiday filled with unrealistic expectations. But I think these past few days have shown me that sometimes it's not about the expectations, it's about the people you're with." Olivia smiled, feeling the weight of his sincerity. When it was her turn, she tried to hold back her emotions, but the words escaped before she could stop them. "For me, this Christmas is already unlike anything I could have imagined. And it's not just because I'm here, it's because you're here too, Brandon. I don't think I've ever felt like this before." Brandon looked at her intently, the internal conflict still visible in his eyes. But at that moment, he didn't resist. "I feel the same way, Olivia," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I don't think fighting this makes sense anymore." Without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her. It was a kiss filled with intensity but also tenderness, sealing everything they had felt over the past days. When they pulled away, both were smiling, feeling the warmth not just from the fire but from a connection they could no longer deny. The rest of the evening was light-hearted and full of laughter. They talked, toasted, and shared stories, feeling a sense of belonging neither of them had expected to find. When the storm passed and the sun shone over the snow in the days that followed, Olivia and Brandon knew that moment had changed their lives forever. What began as a tense encounter had grown into something much greater, a love that would warm their hearts for every Christmas to come. That Christmas taught them both something precious. The true magic of Christmas isn't in the lights or the gifts, but in the connections we create and the courage to open our hearts to the unexpected. For Olivia, it was a lesson in trusting the flow of life, even when things didn't go as planned. For Brandon, it was a rediscovery of the warmth he thought he'd lost. Together, they found a new meaning for the holiday, a celebration they would never forget. And now, we want to hear from you. What was the most special Christmas you've ever experienced? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt stories like this one. Until next time, may your Christmas be filled with love and new possibilities.